The alien woman glared at me. Who told you to touch my ass? Kieran had spent 3 years preparing for this moment, the Galactic Unity Summit, where representatives from 47 species would gather to negotiate trade agreements and cultural exchanges. As a xenoanthropologist specializing in nonverbal communication, he'd studied countless alien customs, memorized greeting protocols, and learned fragments of 12 languages. What he hadn't prepared for was the chaos of the reception hall. The crystalline ballroom aboard Station Meridian sparkled with bioluminescent decorations from a dozen worlds. Servers, both organic and synthetic, weaved through the crowd carrying trays of species-appropriate refreshments. Kieran clutched his datapad, reviewing notes on Valkyrian customs one last time before his scheduled meeting with their delegation. The Valkyrians were notoriously formal, valuing personal space and ritual above all else. He was so absorbed in his reading that he didn't notice the crowd shifting around him. Someone announced the arrival of the Tellurian ambassador, and the gathering surged forward. Kieran stumbled, his shoulder colliding with someone behind him. His hand shot out instinctively to catch his balance, and he felt his palm make contact with something firm and unmistakably anatomical. Time seemed to freeze. He looked up, into the face of the most striking woman he'd ever seen. She stood nearly 6.5 feet tall, with luminescent violet skin that seemed to shimmer in the ambient light. Her hair fell in silver cascades past her shoulders, and her eyes, deep amber with vertical pupils, burned with sudden fury. The elegant diplomatic robes she wore were midnight blue, adorned with the platinum insignia of the Valkyrian Empire. Who told you to touch my ass? Her voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade, spoken in perfect, accentuated English. Every conversation within 20 feet died instantly. Kieran felt his face burn with mortification as dozens of eyes, human and otherwise, turned toward them. I'm so sorry, he stammered, taking several hasty steps backward. It was completely accidental. The crowd pushed me, and I lost my balance. I apologize profusely. I meant no disrespect, Ambassador. He frantically searched his memory for the proper Valkyrian apology gesture. Zephyra crossed her arms, her expression thunderous. The thin, scale-like patterns along her temples, which he'd read indicated emotion in Valkyrians, darkened to deep purple. You are aware that unsolicited touch is considered a challenge to honor among my people. Yes, I know that. I've studied Valkyrian customs extensively. Kieran pressed his palms together and bowed low, the gesture of profound apology. When he looked up, he attempted the phrase in her language, Velshaw Coram, and I shall tell Van. My shame is complete. I am unworthy of your notice. Something flickered across her face, surprise, perhaps? The rigid anger in her posture softened almost imperceptibly. She studied him with those intense amber eyes, her head tilting slightly. You speak Valkyrian. Her tone remained cool but curious. Poorly, Kieran admitted, straightening. I'm Kieran Mehta, xenoanthropologist with the Human Cultural Exchange Initiative. I was actually on my way to meet your delegation. Though I understand if this incident has complicated that. A tall human man in a diplomatic uniform hurried over, his expression panicked. Ambassador Zephyra, please accept our deepest apologies. I assure you this was entirely. Zephyra raised one elegant hand, silencing him without even glancing in his direction. Her gaze remained fixed on Kieran, assessing. The scales at her temples gradually lightened to a more neutral lavender shade. You will meet me in conference room 7, 1 hour from now, she said, her voice now formal rather than angry. We will discuss whether your clumsiness has irreparably damaged our negotiations. Before Kieran could respond, she turned with fluid grace and swept through the crowd, which parted before her like water. He watched her go, his heart still racing, though he couldn't quite determine if it was from embarrassment, fear of having caused an international incident, or something else entirely. The diplomatic coordinator grabbed his arm. Do you have any idea what you've just done? The Valkyrian trade agreement is hopefully still salvageable, Kieran interrupted, watching the doorway where Zephyra had disappeared. She gave me an hour. I intend to use it. Kieran arrived at conference room 7 with 5 minutes to spare, his arms laden with 3 datapads, a holographic projector, and a small container he'd begged off a Valkyrian trader in the station's market. His research had mentioned that Kelshera flowers, native to Valkyria's northern continent, were traditionally offered when seeking to restore honor after an offense. Zephyra was already there, standing by the panoramic window that overlooked the swirling nebula beyond the station. She'd changed into more practical attire, a fitted uniform that somehow managed to be both professional and elegant. When she turned to face him, her expression was unreadable. "You brought Kelshera," she observed, nodding toward the container. The scales at her temples shifted to a pale gold, a color he didn't recognize from his studies. "I wanted to make a proper apology," Kieran said, setting down his materials and presenting the flowers with both hands, as custom dictated. "Earlier was not my finest moment." She accepted them with a grace that made the simple gesture look ceremonial. "Your pronunciation of Valkyrian is atrocious," she said, but there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. "But your effort is noted. Few humans bother to learn even basic phrases." "I find that humans often expect everyone else to adapt to them," Kieran replied, relaxing slightly. "It's one of our less admirable traits." "Agreed." Zephyra moved to the conference table, where she'd already laid out her own materials. Holographic displays showing complex cultural frameworks and exchange protocols. "Shall we begin? We have much to discuss if we're to salvage the cultural exchange initiative." The next 3 hours were simultaneously exhausting and exhilarating. Zephyra's approach to the exchange program was methodical and formal, emphasizing rigid structures and predetermined interactions. Kieran advocated for flexibility and organic cultural mixing. They disagreed on nearly every point. "You want to send Valkyrian youth to human universities with no supervision." Zephyra's scales darkened with concern. "That's reckless. Our people require structure, guidance. And humans need to learn that not every species thrives under constant oversight," Kieran countered, pulling up statistics on successful exchange programs. "Look at the Andronian integration. Freedom within a supportive framework produced the best cultural understanding. The Andronians are not Valkyrian." Her voice was sharp. "We value discipline, honor, tradition. These cannot be learned through chaos." They argued until the station's artificial evening cycle dimmed the corridor lights outside. Somewhere during their fifth debate, they'd both shed their formal postures. Zephyra had kicked off her ceremonial boots, and Kieran had rolled up his sleeves. Empty cups of various beverages cluttered the table. "Why is this so important to you?" Zephyra asked suddenly, leaning back in her chair. The question wasn't aggressive, it was genuinely curious. Kieran paused, considering his answer. "Because I grew up in a small town where everyone looked the same, thought the same, believed the same things. When I finally left and met people from different countries, different backgrounds, it changed everything. I learned that my way wasn't the only way, or even always the best way. The universe is too vast and too beautiful for isolation." Something in Zephyra's expression softened. The scales at her temples shifted to that pale gold again. "I am the first female Valkyrian to hold the rank of ambassador," she said quietly. "The council selected me to prove that we are progressive, that we're ready to join the galactic community as equals. But if I fail, if this exchange program fails, it won't just reflect poorly on me. It will confirm every doubt they have about whether a woman can handle diplomatic responsibilities." The vulnerability in her admission struck Kieran deeply. He'd been so focused on the political and cultural aspects that he hadn't considered the personal stakes for her. "Then we can't fail," he said simply. "We'll find a compromise. Your structure with my flexibility. Valkyrian honor with human spontaneity." Zephyra met his gaze, and for the first time, she smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed her entire face. "You are either very wise or very foolish," Kieran met her. "Most days, I'm both." They worked through the night, finding middle ground inch by inch. As dawn broke over the station, at least according to the artificial cycles, they drafted a framework that satisfied both their requirements. Somewhere around R7, they'd started sharing stories. Kieran told her about his grandmother's insistence that he become a doctor, and his family's bewilderment when he chose to study alien cultures instead. Zephyra described growing up in a military family where showing emotion was considered weakness, and how she'd learned to channel everything into perfect discipline. "Is that why your scales change color?" Kieran asked, then immediately worried he'd been too personal. "I'm sorry, if that's inappropriate." "It's a biological response we cannot fully control," Zephyra explained, touching the scales at her temple self-consciously. "They reveal our emotional states. It's considered both a blessing and a curse. We cannot lie effectively, but we also cannot hide our feelings." "What does gold mean?" He gestured to her temples, which had been shifting between gold and lavender for the past hour. Her scales deepened to amber, and she looked away. "Curiosity. Interest. It means, you intrigue me, human." The air between them suddenly felt charged. Kieran's mouth went dry. You intrigue me too." Before either could say more, the door chimed. The conference room's AI announced that breakfast service was available in the diplomatic lounge. The spell broke, and they both stood, gathering their materials with sudden awkwardness. "Same time tomorrow?" Zephyra asked, her professional demeanor sliding back into place. "Tomorrow," Kieran agreed, though his mind was still spinning from her admission. As she walked past him toward the door, she paused. "Kieran, thank you for listening, for seeing me as more than just a Valkyrian diplomat. Thank you for seeing me as more than just a clumsy human." Her laugh, bright and unexpected, echoed in the corridor as she left. Kieran stood alone in the conference room, staring at the space where she'd been, and realized he was in serious trouble. 2 weeks into their collaboration, Kieran and Zephyra had established an easy rhythm. Their morning meetings had evolved from formal negotiations to genuine brainstorming sessions, often accompanied by shared meals where they introduced each other to their respective cuisines. Kieran had developed a surprising fondness for Velkor, a spicy Valkyrian grain dish, while Zephyra had become addicted to human coffee, much to his amusement. The station buzzed with excitement as preparations began for the Festival of Understanding, a multi-species celebration marking the summit's midpoint. Each culture would share their traditions, creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. The Valkyrian delegation had chosen to present the HFY, the sacred touch ceremony, a ritual of trust and connection rarely performed for outsiders. "You'll need to participate," Zephyra informed Kieran one morning, her tone carefully neutral though her scales betrayed her nervousness, flickering between gold and silver. "Me?" Kieran looked up from his notes. "Shouldn't this be performed by Valkyrians? The ceremony requires pairs, one who teaches, one who learns. It's meant to demonstrate trust between strangers." She stood, moving to the window. "I chose you as my partner. If you're willing." Kieran's heart rate kicked up. He'd researched the HFY after seeing it mentioned in the festival program. It was an intimate ritual, involving intricate patterns of touch that carried deep meaning in Valkyrian culture. Each gesture communicated specific emotions: respect, trust, affection, even love. "I would be honored," he said carefully. "But Zephyra, I need to know, are you comfortable with this? Given how we met." She turned, and he was struck again by how beautiful she was when she let her guard down. That accidental touch was thoughtless and invasive. The HFY is the opposite. Every contact is intentional, respectful, consensual. It's how touch should be. Over the next 3 days, they met in private rehearsal chambers. Zephyra taught him the ceremonial movements with patience that surprised him. The ritual was far more complex than he'd imagined. "First position," Zephyra instructed, standing before him. "Face each other. This represents acknowledgement. I see you as you truly are." They stood a foot apart, eyes locked. The simple act of sustained eye contact felt unexpectedly intense. Second position, the greeting of equals. She raised her right hand, palm forward. He mirrored the gesture. Slowly, she brought her palm to meet his, fingers aligning perfectly. The contact sent warmth through his entire arm. "Hold this for 3 heartbeats," she whispered. "Feel the energy exchange." Kieran counted, acutely aware of every point where their skin touched. Her palm was warm, slightly textured from the fine scales that covered her body. Third position, the sharing of burdens. She guided his hand to her shoulder while placing hers on his. We support each other's weight. They continued through 12 positions, each more intimate than the last. The 8th position required him to place his hand over her heart while she did the same to him. Through the thin fabric of their ceremonial practice clothes, he could feel her heartbeat, faster than a human's, a rapid flutter that matched his own nervous rhythm. "You're doing well," she murmured, her face inches from his. Her breath smelled faintly of mint. "Better than most humans would. I have an excellent teacher." Her scales flushed deep gold. "The final position is the most sacred. It's called Velshatara, the union of trust." She demonstrated the position, standing so close their bodies nearly touched, each person's hands cradling the other's face, foreheads pressed together. In this position, all deception becomes impossible. Our scales respond to proximity and emotional state. "You'll feel everything I feel." During their final rehearsal, the night before the festival, they moved through the ceremony with increasing fluidity. When they reached Velshatara, Kieran's hands trembled slightly as he brought them to Zephyr's face. Her skin was warm beneath his palms, the scales along her jaw smooth as silk. She mirrored his touch, her long fingers gentle against his cheeks. They stepped closer, closing the final distance between them. When their foreheads touched, Kieran gasped softly. He could feel a faint vibration, a humming energy that seemed to pulse between them. "I feel it," he breathed. "That's my essence," Zephyr whispered. "Every Valkyrian radiates this energy. When we're this close, you can sense emotion as we do." And he could. Beneath the vibration, he felt warmth, nervousness, and something else, something that felt like longing. "Zephyra," he said softly, not moving, not wanting to break the connection. "What are we doing?" "I don't know," she admitted. Her scales had shifted to a deep rose gold he'd never seen before. "This is supposed to be professional. A cultural demonstration. But when you touch me, Kieran, it feels like..." The rehearsal chamber door chimed, startling them apart. One of Zephyr's aides announced that the festival coordinators needed to review their performance space. The moment shattered. But as they gathered their things, Zephyr caught his hand briefly. "Tomorrow, when we perform this before everyone, I need you to know, every touch will be real. Not just ceremony. Do you understand?" Kieran squeezed her hand gently. "I understand." The Festival of Understanding dawned bright and festive. The station's central plaza had been transformed into a kaleidoscope of cultures. When their turn came, Kieran and Zephyr took the ceremonial stage in traditional Valkyrian ritual garments, flowing white robes that left their arms bare for the touching ceremony. The gathered crowd fell silent as they began. Each position flowed into the next with practiced grace. Kieran was aware of thousands watching, but his focus narrowed to Zephyr, the way the station's lights caught the silver in her hair, the shifting colors of her scales, the trust in her eyes as they moved together. When they reached Velshatara, the final position, she whispered so only he could hear, "Don't hold back." He cupped her face, she cradled his, and their foreheads met. The energy between them surged, stronger than in any rehearsal. Around the plaza, Valkyrians in the audience gasped. They could see Zephyr's scales blazing with color, broadcasting what she felt. Kieran didn't care who was watching. In that moment, holding her, feeling the truth of their connection, he knew everything had changed. When they parted and bowed to the audience, the applause was thunderous. But Kieran barely heard it. He was too busy watching Zephyr's scales cycle through every shade of gold and rose, announcing to anyone who understood that she'd fallen for the clumsy human who'd accidentally touched her 2 weeks ago. And from the way she smiled at him, radiant and unguarded, she knew he'd fallen just as hard. The days following the festival were torture. Kieran and Zephyr maintained their professional facade during official meetings, but the tension between them was palpable. Every accidental brush of hands felt electric. Every shared glance lasted a heartbeat too long. They weren't fooling anyone. "You're playing with fire," warned Dr. Rebecca Chen, Kieran's colleague and mentor, cornering him in the station's observation deck. "Cross-species relationships are complicated enough without adding diplomatic implications. If this goes wrong, it could derail years of alliance building." "I'm aware of the risks," Kieran said quietly, watching a transport ship dock in the distance. Are you? The biological incompatibilities alone have been extensively studied, Kieran interrupted. Valkyrians and humans are among the most compatible species for intimate relationships. You know this, Rebecca. You wrote half the research. She sighed. I'm not talking about biology, Kieran. I'm talking about politics. Her people are traditional, formal. What do you think happens when their first female ambassador falls for a human? Kieran had no answer, because he knew she was right. Zephyra faced similar pressure from her own delegation. Her second-in-command, Commander Velthos, a stern male who'd made his disapproval of female leadership clear from the start, confronted her after a council meeting. Your scales betray you, Ambassador, he said coldly. The entire delegation has noticed your attachment to the human. My personal feelings don't interfere with my duties, Zephyra replied, keeping her voice level even as her scales flickered with suppressed anger. Don't they? You've compromised on 17 points of negotiation. You've adopted human customs. You spend every waking hour with him. Velthos leaned closer, his voice dropping. The High Council is watching, Zephyra. One misstep, and they'll use this as proof that women lack the discipline for leadership. Is your infatuation worth destroying everything our people's first female commander fought to achieve? His words haunted her. That night, she stood on her quarter's balcony, staring at the stars and trying to convince herself that duty mattered more than what she felt. Her door chimed. She knew who it was before checking the monitor. We need to talk, Kieran said when she opened the door. He looked as exhausted as she felt. Come in. She stepped aside, her heart racing. They stood in her sitting room, neither quite knowing how to begin. Finally, Kieran spoke. I can't keep pretending. These past weeks with you have been. Zephyra, when I'm with you, everything makes sense. The universe feels smaller, manageable. You make me want to be better than I am. Her scales blazed gold and rose. Kieran, we can't. I know all the reasons we can't. I've heard them from everyone. But nobody's given me one good reason why we shouldn't at least try. Because I could lose everything. The words burst from her. My position, my credibility, my people's faith in female leadership. Because if this fails, it won't just hurt me, it will hurt every Valkyrian woman who dreams of breaking barriers. And if it succeeds? Kieran stepped closer. What if we prove that love doesn't make you weak, it makes you stronger? That different species can find common ground in the most fundamental way. You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's terrifying. He reached for her hand, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. Zephyra's resolve crumbled. She closed the distance between them, her free hand rising to touch his face. If we do this, if we try, there's no going back. Everyone will know. My scales will announce it every time I see you. Then let them know, Kieran whispered, his hand sliding to the small of her back. I'm tired of hiding how I feel. She kissed him. Or he kissed her. Later, neither could remember who moved first. But suddenly they were tangled together, exploring the newness of each other with wonder and hunger. Kieran's hands mapped the planes of her back, feeling the subtle scales that covered her skin. Zephyra's fingers threaded through his hair, pulling him closer as if afraid he might disappear. They stumbled toward her bedroom, shedding formal concerns along with their clothes. Every touch was a discovery, the warmth of her skin, the way she gasped when he kissed the sensitive scales at her throat, the strength in her hands as she pulled him down onto her bed. Tell me if anything is wrong, Kieran murmured against her collarbone. If I do something. You're doing everything right, Zephyra breathed, arching into his touch. Her scales rippled with iridescent color, painting her skin with emotion. Don't stop. Please don't stop. They learned each other through the night, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Zephyra taught him where Valkyrians were most sensitive, the places that made her breath catch. Kieran showed her the pleasure of slow exploration, of building anticipation until they were both trembling. When they finally joined, It felt like the universe clicking into place. They moved together, finding their rhythm, and when Zephyra cried out his name, her scales blazing with pure radiant gold, Kieran thought he'd never seen anything more beautiful. Afterward, they lay tangled in her sheets, skin to skin, heartbeats gradually slowing. Zephyra traced patterns on Kieran's chest, her expression peaceful in a way he'd never seen. "No regrets?" he asked softly, running his fingers through her silver hair. "Not one." She kissed his shoulder. "Though we should probably discuss what happens tomorrow when my scales announce to everyone exactly what we did tonight." Kieran laughed. "Let them talk. We'll face it together." "Together," she agreed, snuggling closer. "I like the sound of that." But their peace was short-lived. 3 days later, Zephyra received an urgent transmission from Valkyria. The High Council demanded her immediate return. They'd arranged a political union with the son of a powerful military family, a match that would cement alliances and prove Zephyra's loyalty to traditional values. She had 2 weeks to return home and prepare for the bonding ceremony. Kieran found Zephyra in the empty observation deck, standing before the viewport with her shoulders rigid. Even from behind, he could see her scales flickering through dark purples and greys, colors of distress and sorrow. "You're leaving," he said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "The High Council has summoned me. A political bonding has been arranged." Her voice was carefully controlled. "It's a great honor. The Union will strengthen military alliances and demonstrate my commitment to Valkyrian values." "Do you love him?" "I've never met him." Kieran's jaw tightened. "That's not an answer." Zephyra finally looked at him, and her eyes were anguished. "Love isn't always enough, Kieran. My people, my responsibilities, are important. I know that. But what about your life? Your happiness?" He took her hand, no longer caring who might see. "You told me once that you became an ambassador to prove women could lead. Doesn't that include leading your own life?" "It's not that simple." "It never is. But answer me this, if you had complete freedom, if there were no political consequences, what would you choose?" Her scales blazed rose gold, betraying her before she could speak. "You. I would choose you. Every time. Then fight for it. For us. Against the entire High Council? Kieran, I can't just." "Why not?" His voice rose with passion. "You're the first female Valkyrian ambassador. You've already broken their most sacred tradition. Why stop now?" Zephyra pulled away, wrapping her arms around herself. "Because if I fail, if I'm wrong about this, I won't be the only one who suffers. Every woman who comes after me will be judged by my choices. I can't be selfish. Choosing love isn't selfish. It's brave." They stood in painful silence, the weight of impossible decisions hanging between them. Finally, Zephyra spoke. "Come with me to Valkyria. Speak to the council. If anyone can make them understand. They won't listen to me. I'm just a human they probably see as a distraction." Kieran turned to face her fully. "But they might listen to you. Not as their obedient ambassador, but as a woman who's found something real in a galaxy full of political arrangements." The next week passed too quickly. Zephyra prepared for departure while Kieran threw himself into research, studying every precedent for cross-species unions, every Valkyrian law that might support their case. Rebecca tried to dissuade him from following Zephyra to her homeworld, but he'd made his decision. "You understand this might end badly," Rebecca warned. "The Valkyrians don't take well to outsiders interfering in their customs." "Then it ends badly. But at least I tried." On the day of Zephyra's departure, Kieran stood in the docking bay, watching the Valkyrian diplomatic ship prepare for launch. He hadn't seen her since their conversation. She'd been sequestered with her delegation for the journey home. He was about to leave when a figure appeared at the ship's boarding ramp. Zephyra, in full ceremonial dress, her scales carefully neutral. She walked directly to him, ignoring the stares of her delegation. "I thought you might not come," she said softly. "I couldn't let you leave without saying goodbye. Or good luck." He struggled for words. "I've made a decision," Zephyra interrupted. I'm going to speak to the High Council. I'm going to tell them that I refuse the arranged bonding. That I choose to determine my own path. Hope flared in Kieran's chest. And if they won't accept that, then I'll resign my position and return here. To you. Her scales shifted to determine silver. You were right. I can't demand equality for Valkyrian women while surrendering my own choices. What kind of leader would that make me? A human ship received permission to follow in our diplomatic convoy, she continued. If you truly meant what you said about fighting for this, for us, then I need you there. I need you to stand with me before the High Council. You want me to come to Valkyria. I want you to help me change my world. She took his hands. I'm terrified, Kieran. But I'm also certain. About you. About us. Will you come? To the end of the universe and back. 3 weeks later, Kieran stood in the Grand Council chamber on Valkyria, a soaring hall carved from luminescent crystal. Hundreds of Valkyrian dignitaries filled the seats, their collective scales creating a shimmering rainbow of color and emotion. At the center sat the 7 High Council members, ancient and imposing. Zephyra stood before them in her ambassador's uniform, her spine straight, her scales blazing defiant gold. Kieran stood 3 paces behind her, as close as protocol allowed. You reject the bonding arrangement, the High Chancellor stated, his scales dark with disapproval. You dishonor your family and your duty. I honor them by demanding the same freedom men have always claimed, Zephyra replied, her voice carrying through the chamber. My male predecessors chose their own bonds. Why should I accept less? Because you are the first female ambassador, another council member said. You represent the possibility of female leadership. If you fail. I have not failed. Zephyra's voice rang out. I negotiated the most comprehensive cultural exchange in our history. I created alliances with 17 new species. I brought honor to Valkyria. She paused, then gestured to Kieran. And I fell in love with someone who sees me as an equal. Someone who values my mind as much as my position. The murmurs grew louder. The council members conferred in low tones. The human may speak, the High Chancellor finally declared. Let him defend this attachment. Kieran stepped forward, his heart pounding. He'd prepared for this moment, memorized arguments and precedents. But standing before the assembled power of an alien civilization, words suddenly seemed inadequate. Then he looked at Zephyra, saw the trust in her eyes, and found his voice. Honorable Council, I don't come before you as a diplomat or scholar. I come as someone who loves one of your citizens. He turned slowly, addressing the entire chamber. You're afraid that if Zephyra chooses her own path, it will be seen as weakness. But I've studied your history. Your greatest leaders weren't those who blindly followed tradition, they were those brave enough to forge new paths. He pulled out a data crystal. This contains testimonials from 47 species represented at the summit. Every one of them was impressed by Ambassador Zephyra's strength, intelligence, and innovation. They don't see her as weak because she's female. They see her as exceptional because of who she is. Pretty words, those called from the assembly. But this human asks us to abandon centuries of tradition for an impulsive romance. No, Kieran countered. I'm asking you to let Ambassador Zephyra prove that strength and love aren't opposites, they're complements. That a leader who chooses her own bond from a position of power sets an example for all Valkyrian women. The High Chancellor raised a hand for silence. You speak well, human. But words alone cannot overturn our customs. He turned to Zephyra. If we allow this, you understand the consequences? You will be scrutinized, questioned, tested at every turn. Your relationship will become a symbol, for better or worse. I understand, Zephyra said firmly. And I'm ready. The council deliberated for 3 agonizing hours. Kieran and Zephyra were led to an antechamber to wait. She paced like a caged predator, her scales cycling through anxious colors. Whatever happens, Kieran said, catching her hand, we'll face it together. You would truly give up your career, your world, to be with me. In a heartbeat. You're not just my choice, Zephyra. You're my future. Her scales blazed pure gold as she kissed him fiercely. When they were summoned back, the chamber was silent. The High Chancellor stood. The Council has decided. We will permit this union, under certain conditions. Ambassador Zephyra will retain her position for a probationary period. Her relationship with the human Kiran Mehta will be observed as a test case for future cross-species bonds. If she proves that such attachments do not weaken her leadership, we will formally recognize the partnership. Relief crashed over Kiran like a wave. Zephyra's scales exploded into radiant gold and rose, her joy visible to everyone. However, the Chancellor continued, this decision is not universal approval. You will face opposition, doubt, and prejudice. Are you prepared for this burden? Zephyra straightened. I am. Because love isn't a burden, it's what makes us stronger than we could ever be alone. The Chancellor's scales softened slightly, perhaps approval, perhaps amusement. Then go. Prove us right to trust you. Epilogue. 6 months later. Kiran stood on the balcony of their shared quarters on Station Meridian, watching transport ships come and go against the backdrop of stars. Behind him, he heard Zephyra moving through their home, a concept that still filled him with wonder. The latest report from the Cultural Exchange Program, Zephyra said, emerging onto the balcony and wrapping her arms around him from behind. 32 successful integration teams. The Valkyrian Council is impressed. Only impressed. Kiran teased, turning in her embrace. You've revolutionized interspecies cooperation, broken your own planet's glass ceiling, and somehow managed to put up with me. I'd call that extraordinary. Her scales flushed that familiar rose gold. You make it sound easy. It hasn't been. But it's been worth it. She kissed him softly. The Council wants us to attend the Galactic Unity Summit next month, as official representatives of successful cross-species partnership. The people who started as a diplomatic incident. The very same. Zephyra laughed, the sound like music. Who would have thought that you accidentally touching my ass would lead to all this? I'm never going to live that down, am I? Never, she confirmed, her eyes sparkling with mischief and love. But I wouldn't change a single moment. Not the fumbling apology, not the arguments, not the fear. All of it led us here. Kiran pulled her closer, marveling as he always did at how perfectly they fit together despite coming from different worlds. Here's to clumsy first meetings and brave second chances. To love that transcends species, Zephyra added. To us, they said together. As they stood wrapped in each other's arms, their story was already spreading across the galaxy, a testament that the greatest distances could be bridged, that love required only courage and an open heart, and that sometimes the most beautiful relationships began with the most awkward first touch. Behind them, through the viewport, a new transport arrived carrying the next group of exchange participants, humans and Valkyrians ready to learn from each other. Kiran and Zephyra had become more than partners. They'd become symbols of possibility, proof that the future belonged to those brave enough to choose connection over convention. And somewhere in the Valkyrian capital, young women looked at Ambassador Zephyra's example and dared to dream of choosing their own paths, their own loves, their own extraordinary lives. The story that began with a glare and an accusation had become a new beginning, not just for two people, but for two entire worlds learning to reach across the stars. The end.